They say the night is peaceful, a time to rest, to dream, to let silence wrap around you like a blanket. But for some, silence is not peace. It's the sound that comes before the scream. When the lights go out and the world falls asleep, the dark begins to breathe. There are footsteps where no one walks, whispers that don't belong to any mouth, and eyes that never blink. Tonight, we're stepping into the shadows, into the real stories of people who were alone at night, when something decided they weren't alone at all. So lock your doors, dim the lights, and listen carefully, because sometimes the quietest nights hide the loudest horrors. Today, we're diving into The Man in the Window. It was late November in a small town outside Portland. Hannah had just moved into her new apartment, a cheap, second-floor place in an old, creaking building. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, and quiet was all she needed, or so she thought. Her days were ordinary, long hours at work, evenings spent reading, then straight to bed. But nights had started to feel strange lately. It began subtly, a faint sound, a soft click from the window latch, the kind of sound you tell yourself came from the wind or the old wood shifting. Then came the cold air. She'd wake up shivering, her blanket slipping to the floor, only to realize the window she swore she had locked was now open. She tried to rationalize everything. Maybe she forgot, maybe the lock was weak. But one night when she woke up at 3:17 a.m., something felt horribly wrong. The room was colder than usual, and the air carried the faintest scent of damp earth and rust. As her eyes adjusted to the dim orange glow from the streetlight outside, she saw it, a shadow. It wasn't moving, it wasn't tall or short, it was just there, right outside her window. Her breath froze. The figure stood perfectly still, but something about it felt aware, like it knew she was awake. She stayed frozen for what felt like hours, her heart hammering so loudly she thought it would give her away. When she finally dared to blink, the shadow was gone. She told herself it was a tree branch, a trick of light, maybe even a bad dream. But the next morning, there were muddy footprints on the fire escape right beneath her window. From that night on, things began escalating. The sounds became louder, a faint scratching at the glass, the rattle of the doorknob at odd hours, even her phone screen lighting up with no notifications, as if something unseen had brushed across it. Days passed in paranoia. She started keeping the lights on at night, her curtains shut tight, but the feeling of being watched never faded. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind made her skin crawl. Then came the night she couldn't ignore it anymore. A heavy rainstorm swept through the town, the kind that made the streets vanish into black rivers and drowned out every sound but thunder. She went to bed early, wrapped in a blanket, trying to drown her fear in exhaustion. Around 2:40 a.m., lightning flashed, bright enough to turn her room white for a second. In that flash, she saw it. A face, pressed against her window. It was pale, dripping wet from the rain, and its eyes, they weren't angry or wild. They were calm, too calm. She screamed and stumbled out of bed, but by the time she turned back, the window was empty again. The curtains swayed in the storm wind, and the lock broken. When she finally found the courage to call the police, they searched the fire escape and the surrounding alley. They found nothing. But as one of the officers was leaving, he noticed something etched faintly into the window frame, carved with something sharp. 2 words, "Still here." Hannah moved out within a week. The landlord didn't seem surprised. Turns out, the previous tenant had also complained about someone watching her from the window at night. But here's the part that still chills the locals to this day. The apartment stayed vacant for months, until a new tenant finally took it. Within 2 weeks, the same calls started coming in again. Scratching sounds, open windows, and every time it rained, someone standing outside just watching. No one has ever caught the man in the window. Some say it's a homeless stalker. Others believe it's something far worse, a shadow that returns whenever someone tries to sleep in that room alone. So the next time you close your window at night, check the lock twice. Because sometimes, the things that watch us in the dark aren't trying to get in. They're already there. If this story gave you chills, the next one will make you afraid to even open your door. Because our next story isn't about what waits outside your window, it's about what hides inside your home. It was one of those nights where silence felt too heavy. Every sound in the apartment echoed like a whisper. The clock ticked louder, the fridge hummed lower, and the darkness seemed to have weight. Maya had lived alone for nearly 2 years in a small apartment complex built in the 1970s. It wasn't luxurious, but it was home. And for a woman who worked night shifts at a nearby hospital, the silence was her comfort. She got home around midnight that night. Her shift had been long, filled with the usual chaos, and all she wanted was a shower and a few hours of sleep. She placed her keys on the counter, kicked off her shoes, and stood under the shower until the warmth numbed her. By 1:30 a.m., the rain had started. It pattered gently against the windows, a soothing sound that lulled her towards sleep. She left a small lamp on near the hallway, a habit she'd picked up after moving in. But as she lay in bed scrolling through her phone, she felt it, that quiet sense that the air wasn't empty anymore. It started with a faint creak. Her apartment wasn't old enough to make those sounds, and she hadn't heard that one before. It came from near the main door. She ignored it, probably the wood swelling from humidity. But then it came again. A slow, dragging creak, like someone had brushed against the door with their palm. She turned off her phone and held her breath. The rain outside masked most sounds, but there was something, a pattern. A faint thump against the door, then silence. Another thump, and then the softest exhale. Her stomach dropped. There was no mistaking it. Someone was standing on the other side of the door, breathing. Her rational mind raced. Maybe a neighbor, maybe someone drunk or lost, but she didn't dare move, she just listened. The breathing continued for a while, slow and deep, like whoever was out there knew she was awake. Minutes crawled by. She gathered enough courage to reach for her phone, but the instant she did, a sound froze her again. It was a whisper, muffled low, just beneath the sound of the rain. She couldn't make out the words, but it wasn't talking to someone. It was talking about something, like a mumble with purpose. Then 3 deliberate knocks. Slow, even. Almost polite. The fear in her chest turned to ice. She wanted to shout to ask who it was, but her throat refused. She just sat there, frozen in the dark, while the rain outside grew heavier. The knocking stopped. Silence. Then a new sound. Tap, 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 from the back door. That was impossible. Her apartment was on the top floor, with the rear door leading only to a tiny balcony, no stairs, no access. Yet someone was tapping from the other side of it. Her breathing quickened. The sound wasn't random, it was rhythmic, like the same knuckles hitting in intervals, moving around her apartment. Front door. Silence. Then balcony door. Silence. Back to front again. Like whoever was outside was circling her apartment, waiting, testing. She turned off her lamp, leaving the room in complete darkness, and sat still, listening. For 10 minutes there was nothing but rain. Then, one last sound, faint, wet footsteps fading away down the corridor. By morning, she convinced herself it was some prank or maybe a dream. But when she checked her front door, she froze. There were 3 wet handprints, each pressed low, like someone had crouched close to the floor, listening through the crack beneath the door. That day, she installed a new deadbolt and a camera. But 2 nights later, the same thing happened, faint knocks, quiet whispers, footsteps that went around her walls. Only this time, the camera recorded something. At 2:16 a.m., a shadow appeared at her door. It stayed there for 27 minutes. No movement, no attempt to open it, just standing. Then it turned toward the lens, revealing a face so pale it looked almost gray, and eyes that seemed to stare directly through the camera, straight into the room. The police investigated, but no one was ever caught. They said maybe it was someone from another building, maybe a delivery person, maybe a glitch. But the footage showed something else. There was no sound of footsteps leaving. The figure just disappeared. 1 second visible, the next, gone mid-frame. Maya moved out the next week. The new tenant never experienced anything unusual, but the building's night guard sometimes swore he saw someone standing by her old door long after midnight, when no one lived there anymore. And whenever it rains, the faint sound of slow, rhythmic knocking still echoes in that hallway. If this story made your heart race, wait for what comes next, because the third story isn't about being watched or followed. It's about something that crawls out of your own reflection. There are things we see every day that we never really look at. Mirrors, for example, we glance, we pass, we move on. But what if one day your reflection doesn't follow you? What if it lingers just a second too long? Alina never believed in the supernatural. She was practical, skeptical, and fiercely logical. She worked late nights as a freelance artist, often finishing her sketches under the soft yellow glow of her desk lamp. Her apartment was quiet, small, and tucked into a downtown building where the streets were never truly silent. The mirror in her hallway had been there when she moved in, tall, framed in dark wood with small cracks webbing near the corners. It faced her living room, catching reflections from every angle. She never paid it much attention, until one night. It was almost 2 a.m. She had been painting for hours, her mind foggy from caffeine. When she finally stood to stretch, her eyes caught movement in the mirror. Something subtle. She looked at it, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. Then she noticed her reflection was a half-second late. She lifted her hand, and it followed just slightly behind. Not enough to scream about, but enough to make her chest tight. She blinked hard, rubbed her eyes, laughed it off. Exhaustion, surely. Too many hours, too little sleep. But something deep inside her knew that wasn't what she saw. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. The reflection seemed aware. When she passed the mirror, she could swear it watched her, the eyes not just reflecting but looking. Once, as she walked by holding a cup of coffee, she froze. Her reflection wasn't holding anything. Her hands in the mirror were empty. She dropped the cup, shattering it across the floor. The reflection stayed still, smiling faintly, a flicker of something too human, too wrong. Then it caught up, as if rewinding itself into place. From that night onward, she started covering the mirror with a sheet. But even then, she could feel it, something behind the fabric, like the air around it pulsed with a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She tried to sleep. But every night, as the wind shifted outside, the sound of faint tapping came from the covered mirror. Slow, measured, as if something inside was testing the boundary. Days turned into nights of fear. Her paintings began to change too, shapes she didn't remember drawing, faces that seemed to stare back from the canvas. Every single one of them had her own eyes. She told herself she was losing her mind. But one evening, when the sun dipped low and her apartment filled with that dying orange light, she noticed the sheet had fallen. The mirror was uncovered. She swore she hadn't touched it. Her heart pounded. She stepped closer. Her reflection stood still, exactly as it should, but her surroundings in the glass weren't the same. The reflection of her apartment looked darker. The light behind her in the real world was gone in the mirror. And something stood far in the background, a faint outline, near the edge of the mirrored hallway. She turned around, nothing there. When she looked back, the figure in the reflection was closer. It wasn't detailed, just a tall, featureless silhouette, but the shape was human, and the head was tilted, watching. The lights flickered. For one horrifying instant, the reflection moved before she did. It smiled, a faint, unnatural curve spreading across its face where hers stayed frozen. Then it lifted its hand and pressed it against the inside of the glass. A mark appeared, a smudge shaped like a handprint from the inside. Elena stumbled back, heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The lights went out completely, plunging her apartment into darkness. She fumbled for her phone, for any kind of light. And in that split second, illuminated only by her phone's glow, she saw her reflection clearly. It wasn't her anymore. It was the same face, but drained of life. The eyes hollow, lips curved into something that didn't belong to her. And it moved closer toward the glass, until the reflection pressed its entire face against it, leaving a dark, foggy imprint of breath. She screamed and threw the sheet back over the mirror. Then she ran. By the time she returned the next morning with her friend, the mirror was cracked all the way through, as though something had hit it from the inside. She threw it away that very day. But for weeks afterward, her phone camera would sometimes glitch, her reflection appearing a second before the frame even loaded, staring straight into the lens with that same faint, hollow smile. The mirror ended up in a thrift shop on the edge of town. The store owner put it up for sale, unaware of its history. It didn't last long. Someone bought it the same week. A college student moving into a new apartment. No one's heard from her since. If this story made you afraid to look in the mirror tonight, the next one will make you question what really follows you in the dark, even when you swear you're alone. There are moments in life when silence feels wrong, when every instinct inside you screams that something unseen is near, just beyond sight, waiting for you to notice it. Daniel had lived alone for almost a year in a small suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Illinois. He liked solitude, the kind that let him think. His house sat near a patch of old woods, thick, shadowed trees that whispered whenever the wind passed through. He was used to the sounds of nature, the occasional rustle, the distant call of an owl, the hum of crickets that filled the night. But one evening, something changed. It started when he took his usual walk around 11 p.m., a nightly habit he never skipped. It cleared his mind before bed. The air was cold, the moon pale, and the streets almost empty. His footsteps echoed softly on the pavement, steady and calm. Then, after the third turn down the street, he heard it. Another pair of footsteps. At first faint, a rhythm that matched his own, only slightly delayed. He glanced back. Nothing. Just the dark stretch of road, lined with trees swaying under the moonlight. He told himself it was probably the echo bouncing off the houses. But when he stopped walking, the sound didn't stop. It took 2 more steps, then silence. His chest tightened. He looked again, eyes scanning the empty street. No movement, no shadows out of place. The wind brushed past, cold and hollow. He started walking again, faster now, hands deep in his jacket pockets. The footsteps returned. Soft, steady, always keeping the same distance behind him. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, but the air felt heavier, thicker, like the night itself was watching. Every instinct screamed that he wasn't alone. He turned onto a narrower path that led past the woods. It was darker here, the trees crowding close, their branches like skeletal hands clawing at the sky. The footsteps followed, closer now, too close. Then something new. A low, dragging sound, like fabric scraping against concrete. He turned sharply. Still nothing, just the shifting dark between the trees. The wind had stopped. Even the insects had gone silent. The only sound left was the faint scrape, closer, closer, then gone. His breathing quickened. The path was long, with no houses until the next block. Every shadow seemed alive. Every movement of the branches looked like a figure leaning forward. He kept walking faster, but the footsteps changed pace too, soft, deliberate, matching his stride exactly. He could feel it now, that heavy presence behind him, like someone tall, quiet, and patient. He didn't dare turn around again. He just walked faster and faster until his house finally appeared at the end of the street, faint yellow light glowing from the porch. He reached it, rushed up the steps, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Inside, the silence returned, but not peace. The air felt wrong, heavy, electric. He stood there for a moment, catching his breath. Then he saw it, muddy footprints leading from the front door, across the living room, straight toward the hallway. He froze. He hadn't taken off his shoes. Slowly, he backed away. The footprints were long, far longer than his own, and wet, as if someone had been walking through the woods. He grabbed his phone to call for help, but the battery was dead. The power flickered once, twice, then the house went black. That's when he heard it again. Those same slow, steady footsteps, now inside. They came from the hallway, moving toward him. No rush, no panic, just the sound of something that knew it didn't need to hurry. The footsteps stopped right behind him. He didn't turn, couldn't. Every hair on his body stood on end. The air behind him felt cold, colder than anything human. Then came a breath, long, deep, and heavy, right at the back of his neck. He ran. He sprinted into his bedroom, slammed the door, and pressed himself against it. The sound of slow footsteps moved down the hall again, this time stopping outside his door. He waited, heart pounding, afraid even to breathe. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the handle turned. Just a little, enough to click, then stopped. He stayed like that all night, frozen, until the first rays of daylight finally broke through his window. When he opened the door the next morning, there was nothing there. No footprints, no sound, no proof of what happened. But something was different. The front door, the one he locked himself, was wide open. He moved out a week later, unable to shake the feeling that whatever had followed him that night had never stopped walking. The new owner, a middle-aged woman, complained to her neighbors soon after moving in. She said she couldn't sleep because she kept hearing someone walking in the hallway. Every night, always stopping right outside her bedroom door. And sometimes when she stood very still and listened, she could hear breathing, slow and steady, just inches behind her. If this story made you afraid to walk alone tonight, then the next one will go even deeper, into a place where the terror doesn't wait outside or follow behind. It lives right inside your own home. Every home holds secrets, some buried in walls, some trapped in air that never seems to move. But some homes have secrets that were never meant to be found. Nora had just moved into a small house outside Denver. It was old but charming, 2 bedrooms, a narrow staircase, and a strange layout that hinted it had been renovated many times over the decades. The house stood slightly apart from the others, surrounded by half-dead trees and a thin fence that leaned with age. She lived alone, worked remotely, and loved the peace that came from quiet spaces. For years, she'd chased noise, the city, friends, bars, crowds. But lately, silence had become her comfort. She wanted a place where she could breathe. The house seemed perfect. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. She unpacked slowly, keeping things minimal. The kitchen always smelled faintly of dust and pine. The living room light fell in soft streaks through thin curtains, and the floors creaked in harmless ways that only old homes do. The air inside always felt a little colder than it should, but she chalked it up to poor insulation. Until one morning, while organizing the guest room closet, she noticed something odd. The back wall didn't sound right. When she knocked on it, it didn't echo like wood, it sounded hollow. She frowned, pressing her ear against the wall. There was a faint vibration, a tiny hum like the sound of air moving behind it. Maybe old pipes, maybe a sealed vent. She tapped again, moving her hand slowly across the surface. About halfway across, the pitch changed duller, deeper, like knocking on something covering a void. It lingered in her mind for the rest of the day. That night, a storm rolled in soft thunder, distant lightning. Around 2:15 a.m., Nora woke to a sound. It was soft at first, rhythmic, coming from the direction of the guest room. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Half asleep, she assumed it was the rain or maybe the pipes adjusting in the cold. But as she stood in the hallway, her body tensed. The sound wasn't random. It had a pattern, deliberate, almost like communication. She turned on the light, opened the guest room door, and waited. Silence. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. By morning, she convinced herself it was nothing. But when she went back into the closet to continue sorting things, the air inside felt colder, unnaturally so. The wood smelled faintly of earth, like something damp and buried. The tapping returned the next night, louder. It came between 2 and 3 a.m., always from the same place, that back wall. Days passed. Each night the sound grew more insistent, more confident. Until one morning when she saw it. A small patch of wallpaper near the corner had begun to peel. Beneath it, she saw the faint outline of a shape, rectangular, uneven like the frame of something hidden. She tore at it, peeling more paper away until it revealed what it truly was, a door. Not full-sized, smaller, waist-high, almost like an access hatch. The edges were sealed shut with layers of old paint. No handle, just a faint outline and the smell of cold dust escaping through the cracks. She stepped back, heart pounding. There was no record of any crawl space or hidden storage in the house blueprints. No indication from the realtor. Still, curiosity is stronger than reason. That evening, she fetched a screwdriver and a flashlight. Kneeling, she pried at the edges until the paint cracked and flaked off like dead skin. The frame loosened. The air that seeped out was freezing, the kind of cold that doesn't belong indoors. When the door finally creaked open, it revealed a dark square of nothingness, a narrow passage. The smell hit her instantly, mold, rust, and something metallic, faint but sharp like old blood. Her flashlight beam cut through layers of dust and cobwebs, revealing cracked concrete walls leading deeper. At the end of the tunnel, she saw another door. She should have closed it right there, but there was something about the silence, dense, expectant, that made it feel like she had to go, like something was waiting. She crawled inside. The tunnel was barely wide enough for her shoulders. The deeper she went, the colder it became. The flashlight flickered as if struggling against the darkness. Her breath trembled in front of her. The second door had deep scratches around the handle, long, uneven marks, as if someone had clawed at it from the inside. Her stomach turned. She reached for the handle. It turned too easily. The door opened into a small, windowless room. Dust layered every surface. The walls were bare but marked with faint outlines, suggesting that things, frames, maybe tools, had once hung there. A toppled chair lay in the center. Papers scattered across the floor, yellowed and stiff with age. She knelt and picked one up, an old police report. Then another and another. All from the same year. All referencing missing people. Each page listed a name, a date, and a location, all within a few miles of where she stood. Her hands trembled. As her flashlight drifted upward, she saw something else, a framed piece of glass on the far wall, cracked across the center. In the reflection, for just a second, her movement didn't align. Her reflection turned slower. The air thickened, growing heavy and electric. The cold deepened until her breath became a visible mist. Then she heard it. Not tapping this time. Breathing. Slow, shallow, close. The flashlight beam swung wildly, cutting through shadows. Nothing. The tunnel behind her was pitch black, but she could feel the weight of something watching from it. She stepped back toward the door, but where the doorway had been, there was now only a solid wall. Her heart pounded. She pressed her hands against the concrete, searching, scraping. It was seamless. No gap, no way out. The cold intensified, pressing against her like invisible hands. Her fingers burned with numbness. Then in the far corner of the room, something moved. It was faint at first, a subtle shift, like dust settling. Then the shadows began to change shape. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was crouched low, its limbs wrong, its skin pale and tight over bones that looked too sharp. The head tilted downward, facing the wall. It didn't move, but the air seemed to hum around it. Every instinct in Nora's body screamed to run, but her legs felt rooted. The flashlight flickered, dimmed, and pulsed weakly. The figure twitched. Then slowly it began to rise. Its back dragged against the wall, the sound scraping like nails on concrete, the same rhythm she had heard those nights from the closet. It stood fully upright now, its head tilted to one side, neck bending too far. The face was pale, eyes wide and colorless, lips parted slightly as if caught mid-breath. The flashlight went out. Darkness swallowed everything. She couldn't scream, the air felt thick, choking her throat. All she could do was listen to the soft, wet sound of breathing drawing closer. And then cold. A presence inches away. A faint brush of air against her face, something exhaling beside her ear. When she woke up, she was lying on her bedroom floor. Morning light streamed weakly through the blinds. Her clothes were covered in dust, her hair tangled, and her fingernails dark with grime. The guest room door was shut tight. She opened it with shaking hands. The closet wall was perfectly smooth. No outline, no door, just wallpaper, slightly uneven but sealed. She called a friend, packed a suitcase, and left the house the same day. Weeks later, when new buyers scheduled renovations, the construction team tore through the guest room wall to install new insulation. They found nothing, no hollow space, no hidden passage, just solid concrete foundation. But the workers did report something strange. Every time their drill touched that wall, it would jam. Tools would stop working for no reason. The lights would flicker in that room only. And when they stood still, sometimes they'd hear faint tapping from somewhere deep inside the wall. One worker swore he felt a pulse through the concrete, as if something behind it was alive. He quit that same day. Now the house sits quietly again, sold, lived in, and repainted. The walls are new, the wallpaper fresh. But some nights when everything else is still, the new owner says the air feels colder in that one corner of the guest room. And sometimes, if you listen close enough, you can still hear it. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap. If this story made you check your walls tonight, remember, the dark isn't always empty. Sometimes it's just waiting for you to find the door. If these true stories made your skin crawl, remember, fear hides best in familiar places. Don't forget to like this video if you felt the chill. Share it with someone brave enough to watch alone. And subscribe, because darker, deadlier stories are waiting in the next upload.